Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Gary Smith, GMB Scotland Secretary. I hope you can hear me. I'm croaking my way through this meeting this evening. I'm delighted to be hosting a really distinguished panel this evening and talking about this hugely important issue about racism in our society, how we combat racism and how we combat fascism. You'll have an opportunity to post comments or questions. Please do so, and I'll try and get to them as we go through the meeting. Just a few comments maybe from myself before I introduce our speakers. I'm really pleased that in GMB Scotland we're hosting this meeting because as somebody who came back to Scotland after many years away, about 5 or 6 years ago, I have long felt that our country has been far too complacent about racism. It's often been portrayed that racism is a problem down south or somewhere else. I hope, and I'm interested to hear from our speakers tonight, particularly Truth and Anas, about their views about racism in Scotland. The meeting that we're holding, it comes at a really important time as well, because we had a fascist standing in Glasgow at the Scottish elections. And of course, our brother Anas, was attacked, racially abused on the streets of Scotland as we went through the election process. So great to have Anas here tonight. I really want to get his view on his experience going through the election and of Scotland more broadly. In Scotland, the Equality and Human Rights Commission is also looking at the treatment of BAME care workers as we went through the pandemic. We know BAME workers were or have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and the BAME workers, in our view, were very much disadvantaged at work with no proper risk assessments and were often discriminated against by their employer. And I think this evening also gives us an opportunity to face into and to discuss the issue of anti-Semitism, which has blighted the left. And unfortunately for us in the GMB, we have not been immune from anti-Semitism either. We have had to deal with anti-Semitic attacks on one of our employees in GMB Scotland. We've really had to face into this problem, and it's quite staggering that the measures that we've had to take to protect one of our employees because of anti-Semitism. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. So really great lineup. They're going to speak for about 5 to 8 minutes. We'll take any questions. I've got a number of questions myself, and as I say, I'll try and deal with any comments as we go through the session as well. First up, and he doesn't need an awful lot of introduction, is Anas Sarwar, the leader of Scottish Labour. He's a great comrade of ours, he's a member of our union. We're so proud to have him as a member, and he's fought a fantastic election campaign in Scotland, though, as I say, it's absolutely horrific to watch Anas being attacked on the streets of Scotland as he went about the election campaign. We've got Miriam Norwich, who's a GMB activist, previous chair of Young Labour, and is the trade union lead for the Jewish Labour movement. I'm very proud to be a member of JLM, so it's great to see you tonight, Miriam. And Don Butler, for anybody in the GMB, Don doesn't need any introduction either, a long-standing GMB member, former GMB employee and MP for Brent Central. Don, thank you very much for joining us. And Truth Weidiger, who works with us in GMB Scotland, very important part of the team, and I'm delighted to have you speaking tonight as well, Truth. With no further ado, Anas, would you mind giving us a few introductory comments? Would you like to open up the meeting this evening for us, please?
Thank you, Gary. And can I start by saying how much of a pleasure it is to share the panel with Miriam, with Truth, and also with Don, of course, with yourself as well, Gary. And can I put on record right at the outset my sincere thanks to the GMB Union my own union, who has always stood shoulder to shoulder with me in the face of all forms of prejudice and hate. I know that should go as a given, but actually, to be honest, it's not a given. And there are too many organisations that choose to take the easy route of silence far too often. But I'm really proud that my own union, GMB Union, is not one of those unions and not one of those organisations that thinks you can stay quiet. We don't have the luxury of picking and choosing. We don't have the luxury of having some kind of hierarchy of prejudice. Now is the time to speak out against all forms of prejudice or hate. And I'm proud that the GMB, under your leadership in Scotland, Gary, has been at the forefront of doing that. I'm also really pleased that you referenced the so-called Scottish exceptionalism. This idea that just because we live in Scotland, we're born in Scotland, or we've travelled to Scotland, that somehow we are immune here to acts of prejudice or hate is just simply not true. The reality is there are good people and bad people in every city and in every country right around the world. And we do not confront the ills in our society if we choose to ignore them here in Scotland. And I think that's a huge lesson for us to learn. You referenced the far right standing in Glasgow Southside and in Scotland. What I'm really proud of is that every single time the far right has decided to stand for election in Scotland, the Scottish people, and in particular the Glasgow people, have told them where to go. And you saw that from the far right candidate only receiving 46 votes in Glasgow Southside, the resounding message of and rejection that the far right got in Glasgow. But whilst that's to be welcomed, I don't think we can be blind to the underlying issues that we face in our society. I'm going to be really blunt about this. There is not a single organisation, not a single institution, not a single political party that is immune to prejudice and hate. Every single organisation, every single institution, and every single political party has issues with sexism, homophobia, racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and other forms of prejudice and hate. Because if they are reflections of society and those prejudices exist in society, then they're going to exist in individual institutions as well. And what we're talking about isn't always in-your-face prejudice and hatred. It's about recognising that so much of prejudice and hate might not be directly in your face, but it impacts on your life chances, your life experiences, and your life outcomes. It impacts on your access to the employment market. It impacts on the education that you receive. It impacts on your confidence in your own local community. It disproportionately impacts on women because there is a clear intersectional nature to prejudice. There is no coincidence that you are the most likely victim of prejudice or hate if you're a woman, and you're the most likely perpetrator of that prejudice and hate if you're a man. There is a direct link between the inherent sexism of prejudice and hate in all of its forms. I think it's also important to say that we can't pick and choose, but I made that reference earlier on, but we can't allow individual communities to fight their own fights. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. We are not going to defeat anti-Semitism if we leave it just to the Jewish community. We are not going to defeat Islamophobia if we just leave it to the Muslim community. We are not going to defeat homophobia if we just leave it to our LGBT communities. We aren't going to defeat sexism if we leave it just to the sisters. We're not going to defeat racism if we only leave it to our diverse minority communities. Only if we see each other's fight as our own fight are we going to try and address these fundamental issues that we have in our society. But what are the meaningful actions we need to take? Words is one part. So, of course, I was really pleased that individual leaders, individual organizations, individual political parties made really strong statements during the height of the Black Lives Matter campaign. But to be honest, words are the easy part. It's easy for people to give really bold language and words when you've got a trending hashtag right around the world. The much harder part is when the hashtag stops trending and the campaign goes away from the mainstream and the media attention goes somewhere else, whether people are taking the meaningful action necessary to confront these issues. And I don't think we're yet seeing the meaningful action that we need to see. And what do I mean by that meaningful action? I'm talking about how you have trained hate crime officers across every beat and every part of Scotland. It doesn't exist right now, therefore stopping people coming forward and reporting their experiences. It means making sure you're equalising our employment market so everyone has the same chance, not as a BBC investigation found that if you submit two identical CVs, if the name starts with Mohammed, you've got 3 times less likelihood of getting called for that interview than if your name is Adam. That's not how you address it. It's by recognizing that we teach a whitewashed history in our education system. I'm deliberately using that word, whitewashed. We don't teach our diverse history here in Scotland and across the UK as the answer to the far right. How do we teach our diverse history, and how do we make sure we have a society that works for everyone? Now, I've probably spoken for far too long, so I'm going to say one last thing, Gary, and that's to say we can't separate our political discourse from how our communities treat each other. So if we think we can have the divisive language in our politics, hateful language in our politics, and it's not going to impact on our wider society, we're kidding ourselves on. So politicians need to lead from the front, act by example, but also take the actions in government and in opposition to try and create a better society. I'll stop there, Gary. Sorry, I probably spoke for too long.
Fantastic introduction, Anas, and thank you. And as I say, I know I speak for many of us, absolutely horrified when you were confronted by that fascist on the streets of Edinburgh, which serves to demonstrate how much work we've still got to do in Scotland, tackling fascism and racism. And Anas, you talked about hate crime officers. I have to say, I mean, I was absolutely staggered by the fact that we have had to bring hate crime officers into our own union offices to talk about protecting one of our employees, a young Jewish employee who was subject to the most vile hate, and unfortunately vile hate from the left, anti-Semitic hate, often from the left. And it wasn't just a problem for the left, it was a problem for the SNP. But anti-Semitism, the fact that we've had to tackle this in our own union just staggers me. Miriam, I wonder if you could say a few words about racism, about fascism, and of course anti-Semitism.
Thank you so much, Gary, and I want to say a huge thank you for being such a phenomenal ally to the Jewish community. Honestly, it really means the world, and it really does help so many Jewish trade unionists across our nations. So thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel, and it's a particular pleasure to speak alongside some incredible heroes of our movement. I just want to say a big thank you to GMB Scotland for all the amazing work that you do. I'm so proud to be a GMB London activist and trade union officer for the Jewish Labour Movement. And it's really important that we're having this discussion today, as anti-racism is a core trade unionist value, and it has to be at the centre of absolutely everything that we do. One of my favourite things to talk about is the proud history of Jewish trade unionism, from the London Jewish Bakers Union to the Amalgamated Jewish Tailors, Machinists and Pressers Union, which was actually my great-granddad's union, and it eventually became a part of the GMB, which is a fun sort of overlap between Jewish and GMB history, which I quite like. I'm going to be speaking a little bit tonight, particularly about anti-Semitism, my own experience of it, and where we go from here. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism, just like all forms of racism, can be found inside and outside of the labour movement. And as the labour and trade union movement, we have a responsibility to confront it and to eradicate it. I want to stress that my experience of anti-Semitism in the labour movement is far from unique. It's mirrored by countless other Jewish activists. And as always, intersectionality has a huge impact upon a person's experience of racism. Jewish women, and especially Jews of colour, experience particularly severe anti-Semitism. It was an enormous privilege to chair Young Labour, which is the youth wing of the Labour Party, for 2 years. But there wasn't a day that went by when I didn't feel incredibly inspired by and in awe of incredible young trade unionists and labour activists. But unfortunately, a constant feature of those 2 years was anti-Semitism. It started right in earnest from the moment that I was elected. Claims were made online that my election was, in fact, an Israeli conspiracy, which was news to me. Much of this anti-Semitism took place online. I was regularly sent photos of dead bodies, including children. I was accused of being a secret Mossad agent more times than I can count, and of secretly plotting to destroy Labour simply because I was Jewish. Some of it followed me into the real world as well, outside of social media. Having police sitting around your kitchen table because of threats you've received is a surreal experience I don't think I'll ever forget. Overall, it was exhausting, but I want to stress how ununique this experience was. Countless other Jews on the left experienced far worse than me. I think I found it a lot harder when the anti-Semitism came from our own movement. But I couldn't have been more grateful for the incredible GMB comrades, including my own region in London, for being the most amazing allies in the face of anti-Semitism. I don't think I would have got through those years without comrades from Labour and the trade union movement. The power of that allyship really can't be overstated. One of the things that I think was particularly hard to deal with was the denial of our experiences. I think when you're on the left, it can be quite easy to think of ourselves as the good guys. The Tories are cruel and abhorrent, so surely we must be in the right. It's really important that we constantly educate ourselves about all forms of oppression and hold ourselves to the highest standard. All too often, we saw people being given a free pass to be racist or anti-Semitic because of who they were friends with or who they knew. It's never acceptable. We need to have the courage to challenge racism wherever we see it, and especially from our friends and ourselves. Luckily, I think things have got better, and the Labour Party's relationship with the Jewish community is slowly healing. But it won't happen overnight, and we still have a long way to go. I think the clear leadership of Keir, Anas, and incredible trade unionists like Gary has made a huge difference. As well as this, we need a truly independent complaints procedure from the Labour Party, and that's something that we're seeing happening at the moment, which is really positive. But as well as this, that's only part of the picture. We need action from social media companies to actually ban anti-Semitic accounts and take action against hate. I've lost count the number of times I received a threat online, and Twitter didn't deem it actually enough to actually take action against. One of the things I personally found really helpful was fellow activists checking in. So even when I wasn't able to reply to a message, just checking in on your friends who might be experiencing anti-Semitism or racism can be incredibly powerful and just help people feel a little bit less alone. We have to be alert to all forms of racism. I mean, just because things are getting better doesn't mean that we can be complacent. And I think it's particularly important that we talk about rising Islamophobia and anti-Black racism too. There are those all over the Labour movement and outside of it who would seek to divide us by our faith and our race. I'm proud to be in the Labour movement. I'm proud to be Jewish. And we know that our diversity and our strength our diversity is a strength and not a weakness. So thank you so much for having me as a part of this panel. It's really great to be here tonight and discussing this with everyone.
Miriam, thank you very much for your powerful introduction. And we should say this for our own trade union. If you read the autobiography of Will Thorne, there is a horrific anti-Semitic part of that book, passage in that book. I think it was brave, actually, that it was left in the autobiographies. It's been reproduced. I think, on balance, it was the right thing to do, because I think when we're facing up to anti-Semitism and all forms of racism, our starting point has to be honesty. And we do have this anti-Semitism in our history, but at the same time, we have this very strong Jewish link in our history as well, from Eleanor Marx, and as you said, Miriam, with the clothing and textile workers as well. And we'll come back maybe to talk a bit further about anti-Semitism and our experiences of it in Scotland. But thank you very much for those opening comments. I'm really, really pleased that we're joined by Dawn from London tonight as well. As I say, Dawn worked for GMB. I've seen the stuff online, Dawn, about your experiences with racist police stop in London, and we're very honoured to have you here, Dawn, and welcome to you, and look forward to hearing your opening comments, please, Dawn.
Thank you so much, Gary, and thank you for having this discussion and debate today. It's so important that we continue to talk about it, because far too often people try and hide it away or cover it up and think if we don't talk about it, racism, then it doesn't exist. Or, as Miriam quite eloquently said, we've got better, so therefore that's okay. And it's not okay. It's not okay until all forms of racism is eradicated. And that's a fact. I mean, hearing Anna's story, of being abused in the street. I mean, it's a frightening thing when it happens to you, and you wonder, how are you going to cope with that situation? I mean, the latest thing that I've had is somebody who stood for the Brexit Party said that I deserved a bullet in the back of the head, and that person, was arrested by still yet to go to court. And we have to challenge this behavior and attitude every single time, because we've already been told and warned that the rise of the far right is far greater than any other rise of any other hate group. And the fact that we ignore it means that it's getting worse. And, you know, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, he saw Boris Johnson as the leader of the far right. And so they were emboldened, and Trump emboldened these people to almost come out of the woodwork and think that it's okay. So it's important that we talk about it. It's important that we stand up against it. You know, equality is equality. I always say that. Somebody says, well, it's not proper English. I said, but it means something. It means that me fighting for somebody else's rights actually enhances my rights. It doesn't take away anything from me fighting for somebody else's rights. And I think the more we look at becoming allies and good allies means that we will build a much better society for everybody. And the trade union is fundamental in that. I mean, I grew up in the trade union, spent many, many years in the trade union, was the, you know, race and equalities officer, also in the trade union. And the trade union is central and fundamental to that. And we shouldn't shy away from having the battles. We shouldn't shy away from calling out racism wherever it exists. And we also should ensure that, you know, people can go on a journey. You know, they can unlearn their racism, because you're not born a racist. So you can actually unlearn that. And that is also something that we should look at, we should talk about and have, you know, discussions around it. But what we don't do is we don't debate with racists. And I'm so pleased that, you know, you gave the racist party in Scotland a short, sharp shock and kick up the backside. I think that was that made us all smile, just getting 46 votes. It shows that they've only got 46 friends, I think. We also have to look at intersectionality, where different layers of racism exist, because it just means that it's more exhausting. You know, if you are Black, you get discriminated against. If you're a woman, you get discriminated against. If you're young, you get discriminated against even more. And I'm sure that Truth had her story to tell too. So it's so vital and important that we continue to have leaders in the front that's not scared to talk about it, that can stand up to it, can say, well, actually, being woke means that you are awake to the injustices in society. And who wants to live in a society that's unfair and unjust? You know, at the end of the day, if you get education right for Black people, you get education right for everyone. If you get society working for women, you get society working for everyone. Nobody loses when we have equity and equality in society. And people say, like, why does it matter? Or what is this identity politics? It's ridiculous to think that we do not identify ourselves by who we are. I mean, it's a natural progression of life. We always do. There's nothing wrong with that. And we shouldn't allow people who are this anti-woke brigade to lead the discussion or the debate. You know, it's when people used to say things are too politically correct. We shouldn't allow them to take that space. The voices is not equal weight, and we shouldn't allow that to happen at all. But I am optimistic, Gary. I do think that there are so many people in this fight and this battle against injustice that the way forward is that we continue that fight, that we double down, that we get stronger, that we unite. The good people of the, Edmund Burke said, you know, the good people must unite while the bad people are getting together. So the more we unite, the more we talk about it, the more we stand up and fight against it, the more that we will pave the way to a better society. So I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you for inviting me, and a wonderful panel today. So it's great to listen to everybody. Thanks, Gary. Oh, you're on mute, I think, Gary.
Am I on mute?
All right now. Nope, I think they put you back on mute.
Am I off mute now? Miriam, nice message for Shona Thompson, one of the leaders of the women's strike in Glasgow. She said, stay strong, and is condemning all forms of racism. I think great point for Don. This stuff about anti-woke, for me, it seems to be a mask for people thinking they can talk and behave in a racist manner. And a really, really important point about unity. If the labour movement, the trade union movement, is not about unity, what are we about? Truth. I know you're really nervous coming on tonight. Fantastic part of the team in JMB Scotland, and be great to hear from you, Truth.
Hi everyone. So yes, I'm feeling quite nervous, and this is a very ad hoc sort of wee speech I'm going to be giving. But yes, my name is Truth. I'm a GMB employee and I work at GMB Glasgow Reception. So I guess I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experiences growing up as a person of colour in Scotland, but more so the experience of my mother. So just so you're aware, I'm mixed race. My dad is Scottish and my mum is African American. And I do think that it's just totally false to claim that racism does not exist in Scotland. You speak to any person of colour and they will have an experience, I guarantee it. So my mum, she immigrated here from America, and at one point she was wanting to become a childminder. She'd lived here for about 20 years by this point, but she was deathly afraid that people wouldn't want to leave children in her care because she was Black. And there's a reason for that. This isn't just some hysteria that's born out of nowhere. Equally, when she moved here as an American, people were shocked to discover that her first language was English. A lot of people couldn't fathom that or get their heads around that. And also my little brother, who is of a slightly darker complexion to me, has basically been jumped and has had fights picked with him just because he's a Black boy and because we're taught these stereotypes that Black boys are more violent simply by predisposition. In my own experience, thankfully, I've never had anything too blatant or malicious, but I've had people question the colour of my eyes because they're green, which to me is just mad because my dad is Scottish. But because, you know, I'm of a brown complexion, somehow I can't have green eyes. And it just speaks to this deep-rooted ignorance. And quite frankly, I'm tired of dealing with it. So this has occurred in the workplace as well. This has happened from, you know, my bosses and my colleagues. And you know, I just think that it's extremely disingenuous for anybody in this country to argue that it's not an issue. You know, I've gone into corner shops where, you know, the shopkeeper is Muslim and they've been praying and they've been abused by customers in the shop because they're praying. And I just think that it just speaks to this culture of ignorance. And in actual fact, you know, brown and Black people, we're all individuals. All our experiences are different. We have our own hopes, dreams, passions, interests. You know, it's just really disheartening to be constantly painted with this same brush. And I do think that it is a matter of education. And I do think we need to do a lot more to dismantle stereotypes and to portray that diversity of experience that people of colour have. We're not all, you know, a homogenous group. We're all individuals. And sort of speaking on the trade union movement generally, to me personally, I still feel that predominantly the trade union movement is fighting for white working class voices. You know, I don't see many people such as myself in positions of leadership. And it is a little bit disheartening because I know that so many people involved in this movement, you know, their heart is in the correct place. But I do think we need to do a lot more to recruit Black and minority ethnic people and to nurture them and to hopefully, you know, positions of power. That would be phenomenal. But But yes, definitely, racism is alive and well in Scotland, and I do think that the trade union movement needs to do a little bit more to integrate people of colour into that, and to give them a voice and to involve them in the decision making. Obviously, it's great to see Patrick Roach leading the NESUWT. I think that's a great sort of move forward. And GMB, we recently sent out a survey to BAME members just to get some feedback about their experiences. You know, that shouldn't be groundbreaking, that should be common practice. But yeah, generally, I just think that we need to foster a sort of culture of compassion, a culture of empathy, and we need to dismantle stereotypes. And we really do need to recognise the diversity of character and the experiences of Black and brown people alike at large. So I won't really say too much. I'm sorry if that was a wee bit, rambly. But I do believe that racism is alive and well in Scotland. And I do believe that the trade union movement needs to adopt a more intersectional approach to its decision making. Because brown and Black people are much less likely to join a trade union, either because they don't know anything about trade unions, or because they just think that, like every other institution in this country, that somehow it's institutionally racist, and it's not actually for them. So yes, I won't say too much more other than that, but I'm happy to see the strides that the movement is making towards more inclusive sort of policy, and I'm just really grateful to be here and have the opportunity to speak a little bit, but I won't say anything more than that. And I just want to say a quick thank you to all the fantastic people who have spoken today. Okay.
Thank you, Truth. That was really hugely powerful personal testimony. A really important member of the team in GMB Scotland, Truth, and we're delighted to have you on board. And the BAME members survey, there was some terrible testimony that came out for our members about their experiences in the workplace, and it's something that we are taking up and we are going to take on. Because if the trade union movement, as I say, is not about equality, including economic equality, then really, what are we about? Really nice comments there, Truth, for Sandy, saying that she salutes you and your personal story. Some other really good comments coming through. And Peter says that nobody ever wants to talk about Scotland's anti-Catholic Irish abuse and shame. So I'm going to come back to that. I'll maybe ask you, Anas, to come back on that, our experience in Glasgow. But one other thing I want to say is about that fascist who stood in the south side of Glasgow. For those of you who don't know south side of Glasgow, and again, maybe Truth or Anas would come back on that, some real social challenges in that particular part of Glasgow, and Anas stood there for the constituency seat, and the fascists obviously tried to exploit some of the social issues that we do have, very unsuccessfully. But I was so proud of the council workers in Glasgow who stood in solidarity with the community, campaigning about the issues that affect everybody in the community, like cuts to local services and the fact that people are living with filthy streets because of cuts. Maybe if I could, Anas, would you mind, and maybe you as well, Truth, giving a view about Scotland and sectarianism? Huge issue for us still. And somebody from the east coast of Scotland who now lives in the west coast and who's lived most of his life down south, coming back, I'm quite staggered by the fact that we still have to deal with sectarianism and this undercurrent of historic or ongoing, maybe, anti-Irish racism as well. Would you care to say something about that? Maybe you first, Anas. You're on mute, brother.
I'll unmute myself. I apologise. Look, I think it's a really important point, and I'm glad Peter raised it. I actually helped publish a book in the last Parliament. So I'm not taking any credit of writing it or editing it, but I just hosted the launch of it in the Parliament, which was focused around the experiences of the Catholic community in Scotland and the prevalence still of anti-Catholic hatred. And the reason why I actually hosted it as the chair of the cross-party group on tackling Islamophobia. But the reason why we deliberately chose to do it that way was to actually demonstrate how so many of these symptoms that fall from prejudice and hate actually reach out to other individual communities as well. So we deliberately did that. And anti-Catholic hatred, of course, is still an issue, not just in the west of Scotland, actually probably across the whole of Scotland, and we can't be naive about that. So we've got to confront that. And the exact same way that I would expect and hope Peter will show solidarity with me in terms of challenging anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, I can promise him that I stand shoulder to shoulder with him in challenging anti-Catholic hatred and all other forms of prejudice and hate. There can't be a hierarchy. We can't pick and choose. Those days are well and truly gone. I should also thank the GMB members. I was out with them campaigning in Govan Hill, and people often point towards the different ethnicities in Govan Hill and try and hide behind the different ethnicities in Govan Hill as if that's the reason why we've got problems there. The reason why we've got problems there is because the policing is not strong enough, the investment is not good enough, the cuts are too strong and too wide, and we have gangmasters operating, exploiting individuals, and we're not got a respect for human rights. And that goes across people of all ethnicities and all backgrounds. And until we address those fundamental issues, we are still going to see people being treated unfairly in Govan Hill, but also other parts of Scotland as well.
Truth, maybe I'm putting this on you, and there's some lovely supportive comments, by the way, Truth, coming in for your comrades, from our comrades, which is lovely to see. You know, you're for the West Coast of Scotland. You got any views on anti-Irish racism and sectarianism? It staggers me. My partner, she's English and really struggles with this. You know, has really struggled to get her head around this in the West Coast of Scotland. You got any views about that, Truth?
I suppose I've not got too much to say, but obviously growing up on the west coast of Scotland, so I'm from Irvine in North Ayrshire, for anybody who's curious. You know, I've witnessed this. I went to a Catholic school, and personally I find it just very interesting how sectarianism and the football culture in Scotland are so closely interlinked, and how just because you support a certain football team, whether you realise it or not, you internalise these, you know, these bigoted views, and you espouse them, you know, like it's part of your culture. And I do think that's deeply troubling. I don't really know what the solution to that would be, but I definitely think that it's still an issue in this country, in this area of the country. And of course, it should be given the same credence as any other form of discrimination. So I won't really say too much other than that, but obviously I do acknowledge that it's a real issue, and it would be interesting to see how we can try and reconcile sectarianism and the football culture in Scotland, because people sing these songs, they chant these songs, and they don't even know what they really mean, but to somebody, you know, that's like a dagger in the heart, and it hurts. It would be interesting just to see how we could work on that in Scotland, and how we could dismantle that if it's even possible. So that's a discussion perhaps that I'd like to see looked into a little bit more. But yes, I won't say anything more than that.
I mean, it's only partly Gary, but I do recall getting asked whether I was a Catholic Muslim or a Protestant Muslim in the west of Scotland. So it kind of shows you the challenge.
Yeah, well, Peter, I hope it shows that we've not ducked the issue at all. There's long-lasting social and economic consequences around sectarianism and anti-Irish racism in Scotland. And it, you know, my big observation, somebody who comes from as an Irish Catholic ancestry myself, is that one thing that unites everybody in the west coast of Scotland is that our services are being cut to bits, unemployment's on the rise, and poverty affects every section, every part of our community. So we need to unite and fight to raise people's living standards, and we need to fight for equality. I think Martin has referenced social media and its role in amplifying and promoting racism and anti-Semitism. Don, would you have a view on that? Miriam would like maybe to come in on the point about social media as well. Maybe yourself first, Don.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Social media has a huge role to play. They are quite negligent in how they handle abuse. You know, often they say things like, it hasn't reached a threshold. And you think, this person has threatened to step on my neck, you know, and you're saying it hasn't reached a threshold. You know, what does it take? And so, the online harms abuse bill should have been passed, and it needs to be made stronger. And social media companies need to be held accountable. And also, not just that, if somebody is caught on social media making abusive comments and racist comments, they should be taken off social media, but all platforms, you know, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you know, they should be exposed and taken off all platforms. It'd be like knocking on their front door and saying, this is what you've done, and I want all your friends, all your mates, all your family to know that this is what you've done. Because if they're abusive online, it's quite likely they're abusive offline. You know, we know that, like, you know, a one woman is killed every 3 days by a man. You know, they don't just all of a sudden become abusive. They are abusive. And so the community, you know, as a society, we need to ensure that we take this seriously. And that's all abuse. And if we say it reaches the threshold, then it reaches a threshold. No, we shouldn't have social media saying, oh, no, it's, you know, it's not violent enough.
Don, sport boycotting social media. Do you think that's the right thing to do? I supported the boycott. Was it last weekend? What's your view on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, I did too. You know, even though we were so close to the election, I was like, oh my goodness. But racism isn't convenient either. So I think it's important that, that we do boycott social media. I mean, that's how they make their money. They make their money from clicks. You know, they make their money by having people on the platform, having people scroll, selling them stuff. That's how they make their money. So if we cut off the source of their income, then they might start taking the issue more seriously. So I do think boycotts have a role to play, Gary. Yeah.
Thank you. Miriam, any views on social media?
I completely agree with Dawn. I think social media companies have a huge responsibility. I also think it's really important that when we see online hate, we actively try and challenge it. And that solidarity is so important. And I think solidarity between communities is really important as well. One of the things I've noticed when I've faced anti-Semitism is that my Muslim comrades have always been the first to come and offer solidarity and offer me support. And that is so important. And I pledge to obviously stand with my Muslim brothers and sisters as well in the face of Islamophobia. And education is a huge point in this as well. And I think what Dawn said is about how people can, you know, we're not born racist, and hopefully how we can be educated and learn and grow our understanding over time. That's really important too. So in schools, I'd really like to see more comprehensive education on anti-racism, as Anas said, de-whitewashing our curriculum. But trying to make sure that when people are online, they can't just pop up under another name and another account. I had someone send me something like 40 emails, anti-Semitic emails in a day, all from different email addresses. So they'll try everything that they can to keep popping up. So we've just got to keep challenging them and challenging social media companies as well. Yeah,
the anti-Semitism, our employee, our comrade and friend, she experienced in Scotland, the stuff that appeared online was just staggering. And I have to say, and I'm going to come back to this point now about misogyny as well, middle-aged men attacking a young woman because she's Jewish. I mean, it's creepy, and I mean it's disgusting. But there was something just really, really creepy about the whole thing as well. We had to expel somebody for GMB in Scotland, as I say, we've not been immune for anti-Semitism. We had to tackle the SNP, where the councillor suspended for spreading anti-Semitic hate. In West Lothian, we had an SNP member, we went after them and had them expelled for the SNP for their anti-Semitism. So it's not something that's been unique to the Labour Party, but sadly it has been a problem for us in the Labour movement. Racism, misogyny often seem to go hand in hand. Dawn, would you like to say something on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like people, as you say, it's creepy, Gary, so people kind of get off on it. Do you know what I mean? They try and find something to attack you on, and whether it's misogyny, they'll go for it, and then they'll add in the racism, and then they'll add in whatever your size or your age or your hair or your makeup or your clothes, you know, they'll just sort of throw it all in there. You know, these are just horrible people. And, you know, I met somebody like a few months ago who said to me, you know, oh, I'm that person online, but I'm not that person offline. I'm like, no, yes, you are. You know, don't look for me to try and help you feel better about yourself. No, you know, I'll have people emailing me saying, oh, you blocked me. And I'm like, well, boo-hoo, stop being such a horrible person. So, you know, we have to just, you know, live by what we believe in and say, well, you know, we do not reward bad behavior. If you're going to be racist, you're going to be Islamophobic, you're going to be anti-Semitic, then, you know, we've got no time for you. And I just think we just need to be a lot harder about that.
Thank you, Dawn. Truth, any views? Any comments you'd like to make about misogyny and racism go hand in hand?
Well, I definitely agree that they come hand in hand. It's just this whole intersectional idea, and I do believe that, you know, if you are, well, I personally believe that women of color experience, you know, a lot more hate, a lot more discrimination, a lot more, you know, bigoted comments than, for example, a man of color. And it is that intersectionality and how these different characteristics, how they're viewed in society, and basically, you know, how they come together and how people respond to that. So if you're Black, that's already a problem. But if you're a Black woman, you know, that's an even more serious problem. That's even more cause for people to come and attack you. So yeah, it's just about how we regard certain characteristics. And I do believe, sorry if I'm waffling a wee bit, that they are very closely interlinked. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that.
Anas, I'm going to bring you in and then Miriam on this important issue as well. Vanessa, solidarity for our colleagues north of the border, a fantastic result in rejecting the fascists. Well, it was a humiliating result for those fascists, but absolutely no room for complacency. The fact that they felt able to stand in the first place tells us we've got much work still to do. Anas?
So can I just pick up on the point of truth, because she's absolutely right. If you look at, you know, you asked about social media platforms. So of course, there's one part around social media platforms where people target particularly BME people, they target particularly women, and if you're a combination of the both, you get a double pile-on. Actually, you're also more likely to face the really hard in-your-face stuff offline if you're a woman from a minority background. And I'll give you a couple of practical examples of that, Gary. Is, you know, if you're a woman wearing a headscarf, you're going to think twice before you're standing at the train station or whether you're sitting on a bus. If you're a woman from any background, but if you're a woman from an ethnic minority background, you're going to look over your shoulder a couple of times when you're walking down certain streets. And that's certain streets in Glasgow. So there are certain streets that people will think twice before they walk down. If you're a woman of any background, but actually doubly if you're a woman of colour, you're going to keep checking your mobile phone battery to make sure you've still got contact with the outside world in case anything bad happens to you. You're going to think twice about how you travel to somewhere or how you get away from somewhere, about your travel arrangements. These are everyday lived experiences for people right now in our own country. And that is just unforgivable and unacceptable. That any woman should have to look over their shoulder or think twice about where they're traveling or where they're going to work or anything else. And that's an everyday occurrence for women right across our country.
Thank you, Anas. Miriam, would you like to give us a view?
Just to say, I completely agree with Truth, Anas and Dawn, absolutely spot on. I think some on the far right and some racists see women as an easier target, and they're also not brave enough to go after men and men of colour. And it's honestly sickening. I keep thinking as well about the assumptions that often women of colour face in politics as well. I mean, there were the two councillors who went to City Hall in London, both women of colour, and it was assumed that they were cleaners. It's absolutely shocking, and this happens all too often. And it's not a surprise as well that the incredible Diane Abbott gets some of the most trolling and most racist abuse online of any politician. And Dawn, completely solidarity as well with the racism that you face as well. It's if you are a woman of colour, it's just 10 times worse.
And on a similar vein, great comrades of ours, Pam Duncan-Glancy, who's just been elected as an MSP, you know, them not having the facilities to bring her into the count because of her disability, I mean, just staggering. And we send our solidarity to Pam as well. And having a disabled member of the Scottish Parliament like Pam, I think, will be transformational in our view about disability and how we tackle disability discrimination. She was so proud that she remembered the GMB, and was so proud that she was elected to the Scottish Parliament as well. We've got about, I think, about 8 minutes left, and I've got a couple of questions that so maybe do a bit of quick fire on this one. I want to ask all the panelists, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the political situation in this country? Bear in mind, we are talking about different countries and very different politics in many ways. But Dawn, maybe we could ask you first, optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, I kind of, in this situation, I kind of like to quote John Lewis, where he says, do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. You know, we used to say that ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or even many lifetimes. And every one of us from every generation must do our part. And if we believe in the change that we seek, then it's easy to commit to doing all we can, and never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in trouble, in good trouble, necessary trouble, because the responsibility is ours alone to build a better society and a more peaceful world. So I'm with John Lewis on that one.
Truly inspiring, Dawn. Brilliant. Beautiful words. Truth, optimistic or pessimistic about, well, Scotland?
So I feel like I'm a bit of an eternal optimist. I've seen a lot of changes growing up in this country. You know, I think that we're headed in the right direction. I think that the Black Lives Matter movement has been, it's filled me with a feeling of hope that I can't put into words. And I do think that we're headed in the right direction. We're having discussions that we've never had before. We're trying to un-whitewash our own history. And I do genuinely believe that we're making some pretty major strides, but we can't be complacent. There's a lot more to be done, but I do believe that the general trend is up. Yes, and we should all be optimists, and we should always fight for what's right, no matter how, you know, impossible it seems. I just think that that's our, you know, human duty to one another. But to answer your question, yes, I feel very optimistic, and I'm happy with the direction that this country is going in. And it's great to see Anas, obviously the first ever, you know, leader of a major political party in this country. You know, he's a person of colour, and I think that's amazing. And I think we have to take every triumph and run with it.
And you know, just on Anas's election, we were criticised as a union for supporting Anas at times, and I just don't get that political factionalism. He was a fantastic candidate, and I was so proud of our executive. And it wasn't an issue of Anas's race; it was an issue of capability. And he's been a fantastic leader for the party in Scotland. Anas, you really have been. Miriam, any views? Are we optimistic or pessimistic?
I definitely feel more optimistic after listening to Dawn and Truth, I have to say. I was feeling a little bit pessimistic, like reading about the Queen's speech yesterday and some of the things the Tories want to do. But I've got so much faith in the Labour movement and the trade union movement to keep on fighting all of those injustices. So cautiously optimistic, hopefully.
And listen, if you've got people for Scotland being optimistic as well, Dawn and Miriam, there is hope. So, Anas, how are we feeling in Scotland? Are we optimistic or pessimistic?
I think given the very kind comments that Truth and yourself, Gary, have said about me, I can't help but feel optimistic. So thank you. Thank you for your very kind comments. And I should emphasise, having someone from ethnic minority background being elected as a leader doesn't mean the fight for equality is over. Far from it. We've still got a huge mountain to climb. And I'll tell you the reason why I feel optimistic, Gary, is I think our situation is pessimistic, but I think our opportunity is optimistic. And what I mean by that is, I think there is now a glimmer of hope that the forces of unity can overcome the forces of division. And the point that I would make to people is, if you look at the way the wave is right now, I think the wave of division is currently winning. But what we have to prepare ourselves for is when the tide turns, that we are ready to have a wave of unity to beat the forces of division. And I think that work has started in Scotland, and I think that work has started across the UK, but we've got to redouble those efforts. So when our moment comes, we can defeat those forces of division and change our country in the process.
It's fantastic to be around people of the left who are so full of hope. And I always believe if we are not the light on the hill, what do we stand for as a movement? And I have to be careful, as the white working class of working class origins, white guy here. I hope coming home, and I hope what I see in society and the changes over my lifetime, that there are more allies now for people of colour, for members of the Jewish community.
Given you're from Edinburgh, I think given you're from Edinburgh, a Hibs fan and ginger, you probably are a minority in the west of Scotland, Gary.
That's a very Scottish joke, that one. Finally, and we are running out of time, how do we tackle racism at work, Miriam? Any views on racism at work? How do we tackle it?
So I think one part of that is recruiting more reps who are BAME and people of colour, and making sure that we have more shop stewards who are able to recruit more workers into unions from BAME backgrounds. That's really, really important. I also think it's about making sure we improve and increase union density across the workforce, make sure that more workers are able to join a union and know what a union is. And part of that is education in schools. In schools, we should be teaching kids what a union is and why they should join one. And it's a travesty that we don't. Also, campaigns as well against racism in the workplace are really important. And GMB, I think, have been really active on this as well, on representing workers in the workplace when they face discrimination. But it is absolutely sickening. And I think during coronavirus, we've seen a real rise in racism and discrimination in the workplace, and particularly considering that Black and ethnic minority workers have really borne the brunt of this virus, especially in the public sector and in our NHS. So yeah, hopefully we're going to see some important actions, but recruiting more BAME reps is a really important step along the way.
Thank you, Miriam. Dawn?
Yeah, I totally agree with Miriam that we need to make sure there's more diversity. We need to make sure that we call out discrimination and racism wherever it rears its ugly head. We need to check our privilege. We've all got various privileges. We are hearing, we've got deaf people. We need to make sure we check our privilege and understand what it means, and just ensure that we're great allies. And by doing that, then we will make those steps forward that needs to happen.
Lovely comments for Anne-Marie. What a breath of fresh air you are, and that's fantastic to listen to you all. Shona, again, talking about unity across society. United in voice is powerful. Fantastic trade union leadership for us in Glasgow. Truth? Racism at work?
So obviously I agree with everything that's been said thus far, and I definitely agree with Miriam's point about appointing more BAME reps and get more people of colour involved in the trade union movement, because I do believe that it alienates people to see a body that doesn't really represent you, and I do believe there needs to be a zero tolerance sort of attitude towards racism in the workplace. Equally, we need to do more to educate people, and I know that people don't want to go on a training course about racism. Perhaps we need to think a bit more about how we frame these things, but I do think that every workplace should have some initiative to treat people about how to treat one another.
Thank you, Truth. We actually did put on training in GMB Scotland around Islamophobia and anti-Semitism because of some of the issues that we'd had to confront internally, and it was hugely powerful. And this almost sounds a bit cliche, but very liberating for those who went on the training as well. But we have to do much more. Anas, final view from yourself?
I will, of course, echo everything that Miriam, Dawn and Truth have said. I just add one thing, is speak out for somebody else. And what I mean by that is, imagine you were the only woman in a workplace, or the only Black person in a workplace, or the only Jew in a workplace, or the only Muslim in a workplace, or the only Catholic in a workplace. How lonely and isolated you could feel, particularly if you were experiencing a prejudice based on your identity or any other part or any other characteristic, and how lonely you would feel and how tiring it would feel if you had to be the one that had to call out the prejudice you were facing. You might do it once and you might get the stigma that comes from it. You might think, I'm not going to bother doing it the second time. The third time you might think, these people just look at me as if I'm some kind of, not welcome, and you might even choose to leave as a result. So my request would be, do all the things that Miriam, Truth and Dawn have suggested you do, but speak out for somebody else, because that person knowing they're not alone is so empowering in itself, and you will feel empowered by doing it as well. So please speak out.
Just a last couple from the comments. Great discussion, says Desmond. And Sandy, if we don't stand together, we stand for nothing at all. Look, we could go on all night. I could say an awful lot, but we have to draw this to a conclusion. Just thank you so much to our panelists who've joined us this evening. Thank you for taking the time. Thanks for everybody who's joined in. And I've taken so much for this evening, and it's great to hear people on the left displaying so much hope, talking about solidarity. Unity truly is strength, and thank you for everybody joining in. Let's continue the fight against fascism and all forms of racism. Solidarity, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Gary. Big applause for you, Gary. Cheers.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks, Gary.